On today's episode of the Old Souls Football Podcast, Neil and I break down the 2000 NFL Draft. We go over the picks, the trades, the busts, and the guys that ended up with gold jackets. All that next. The 2000 Draft is what we're tackling tonight. Some would say maybe the worst draft of the last 20 years. Or would you say
a terrible quarterback draft for sure?
A terrible quarterback draft, except it had the greatest quarterback ever. And I guess the greatest quarterback in some people's opinions. We'll have that debate for another episode. But we're going on today's episode. We're going over the 2000 NFL draft. We're gonna do like these Bill Simmons like redraftable shows, just going through like drafts from the early 2000s, and then kind of
we have to kill time between now and training camp, guys.
Yes. And I think it's a fun exercise because I went through some of these picks
and
I went, woof. And then there were some interesting players like Thomas Jones, who was a bust on the team he got drafted by, but had a career renaissance on his second and third team, which so I thought it was really interesting.
Yes. And fourth team. He was pretty good on the fourth team he played on too.
Yeah, and the Chiefs. Yeah, but we'll get into that. But starting out with the 2000 season, the 2000 draft, you have to talk about the 1999 season, which our podcast has done a pretty good job of recapping. We've had a couple of episodes talking about that era of football. We had Jim Thomas, former Rams beat writer with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. That was the 99 Rams. But that season had a lot of kind of key situations happening that kind of led to a lot of big changes that affected really the 2000s and even up until like last year with the Patriots. So the 99 season, you had the Rams go from basically like worst to first. They came out of nowhere. They go 4-12 in 98.
Biggest underdog in NFL history.
Yep. To Super Bowl champions in 1999. So they're picking 31st. And remember, back then there were only 31 teams. So we don't have 32 first-round picks to recap. The Titans win the AFC in their first season since their rebrand from the Oilers. Haven't made it back since either to the Super Bowl. They pick 30th. The expansion Cleveland Browns set the tone of their next 2 decades, and they go 2-14 in their first season in 99. They drafted Tim Couch with the first pick in the 99 draft, but now here they are again with back-to-back number 1 picks, which hasn't happened since the Jags did it. And before that, I guess the Browns were the last team to do it. Because the Jags did in 21 and 22. They were the number 1 pick.
That's right.
So elite company, Jacksonville. Good job. But I think Trevor Lawrence.
Well, Did Cleveland not do it in 16 and 17?
No, because in 16, the Browns had the second.
They traded out of the pick.
I thought the Browns had the number 2 pick because the Titans traded it to the Rams for Goff.
Oh, yes.
And in the second pick in 16 was Cleveland, and they traded it away for a big package to Philly. But Howie Roseman's such a genius. Just remember, everybody, he traded up to number 2 to take Carson Wentz. So good job, Howie. He's schooling everybody.
Best GM in the game.
Best GM in the game, drafting Carson Wentz. But anyway, so even Cleveland didn't, and Cleveland under Hugh Jackson was a disaster. They weren't as big of a disaster as the expansion Browns in the late 90s, early 2000s. The Patriots go 8-8, which normally would not be a big story, but since there were 3 straight years of regression under head coach Pete Carroll, Bob Kraft fires Carroll, who then immediately takes over at USC and hires his old pal Bill Belichick. He takes the Patriots job, and basically the rest is history. They win 6 Super Bowls with Belichick, and a quarterback we'll mention later here.
Don't forget that Bill Belichick technically was the head coach of 2 teams in the year 2000.
Yes, because he was with the Jets, and we'll go over. There is a trade, or technically a compensation package in the first round regarding that transaction, because that the Jets were involved in a lot of transactions with the draft because they also will mention a Keyshawn Johnson trade that gave them an extra first round pick for this class. But Belichick takes over, so that one move basically creates two different dynasties in the 2000s with USC and Pete Carroll. What do they win? 3 national titles. One was vacated.
Yeah.
And then Bill Belichick wins, like I said, 3 Super Bowls in the 2000s and then another 3 in the 2010s with the Patriots. So even an 8-8 season, you never know what can happen. So,
Yeah.
so anyway, there are a lot of trades. Why don't you kind of recap like the trade scenarios and then we'll kind of go through the draft order.
Yeah. So the first trade we want to talk about, so we're going to talk about them in the order of course where the picks are going to happen. So
Yep.
chronologically, the first pick we want to talk about is New Orleans trading with Washington. Now this did not happen in 2000. This happened in 1999. This is a very famous trade. New Orleans traded everything. Well, almost everything. Their first, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh round selections in 1999, and their first and third in 2000. So that's why this is important because Washington's getting New Orleans first pick, and they did that so they could move up to number 5. Number
I
5 in the draft.
I would say the only trade that would compare, because like people are starting to talk about the Bryce Young, Caleb Williams trade between the
Yeah.
Bears and the Panthers as the worst trade of all time. They try to compare it to the Herschel Walker trade. I think that's like apples and oranges because Herschel Walker was like a current NFL player when the era
Yeah.
like he was actively in the league at that point. This is very comparable, like in terms of Chicago. I think ended up with more. Like they ended up with a number 1 pick,
Unfortunately,
and they got a franchise
I was
quarterback.
going to make that point.
They got
Yeah.
a they
So,
got a first round quarterback of it. But if you look at like the total
yeah,
compensation, this rivals that. Now, I don't think Washington took real advantage of all this extra capital, and they didn't really put together. I guess did one of
well,
those picks become Champ Bailey though?
that's exactly. So, they actually, so I have a tweet from just over a year ago on my own, or no, it was 2 years ago actually, because it's 2024 now. So this is from 2022. And I had said everyone makes fun of Washington for, I said this, but I was quote tweeting the trade package from 1999. Everyone makes fun of Washington for this, but in fairness, they used many of those picks to then trade up for what became Champ Bailey. They made that trade with the Chicago Bears. So the Bears actually should have been the team that benefited the most from this trade, ironically, because it was Ditka trading up for Ricky Williams. And so
Yeah.
the Bears came away with a haul of picks, and this is
My,
who they got.
my question too is if Lloyd Carr isn't so stubborn and just plays Brady for all the snaps in Michigan instead of trying to split it with Henson. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, just because I think Brady, if you actually go back and watch him, he was awesome at Michigan too. Like he had
Yeah.
everything you would look for. There just wasn't very much of it because he basically split time. He was a part-time quarterback in Michigan. I almost wonder like if Lloyd Carr plays Brady more, does Washington use basically this second pick? Because remember, Cleveland has Tim Couch already. Like in hindsight, I'm
Yeah.
thinking like this Brady, because obviously if we did a redraft today, Brady goes number 1 to Cleveland. We already know that. But like
Yeah.
I'm thinking in hindsight, it's like if there were certain things that happened in the
Very,
collegiate
very
game,
hindsight.
yeah. But if there's certain things that
Yeah.
happen in the collegiate game, like that changes everything because like yeah, Washington got a couple of good defensive players, like one of them a great defensive player, which they didn't even really take full advantage of that because they ended up trading him for Clinton Portis. But they, it doesn't hit like a quarterback. So I think Chicago's package is going to end up better just because like they still got the franchise quarterback, we think, back.
Yeah, but in
So,
19, so maybe this is the Bears. Maybe the Bears right now are correcting what they did wrong. actually, I never even thought about that. Maybe the Bears right now are correcting what they did wrong in 1999 and 2000,
Yeah.
because this is what they came away with after they made that trade. Cade McNown, who was out of the league before the 2001 season. So he lasted 2 years in the NFL. And he was a total jag. Like, the offensive line literally admitted to allowing sacks because they didn't like
He
him.
he was a featured player and on Backyard Football
He
2001 though.
was, that's right.
I still
Um,
remember, like, that's the funniest thing though, because you have like Brett Favre, Steve McNair, Javon Curse, who else was on there?
uh,
Kurt Warner or Marshall Faulk.
Steve McNair, Eddie George, I think was on there.
Yeah, you had like
I
the
think he
stars
was.
of the day, and then Cade McNown.
Yeah. Dwayne Bates, the Bears also got
Yeah.
out of that. They got 5 players from this. Dwayne Bates, who was not a good wide receiver. He was serviceable for a few years. I think he actually played more of his career in Kansas City. Warwick Holdman, who was actually a pretty decent linebacker. He played opposite of Urlacher and Roosevelt Colvin. Jerry Wisney, who I don't even know who the hell that is. And lastly, Dustin Lyman, who's most famous for in 2002 when the Bears were playing the Packers. The Bears ran a fake field goal where they pitched the ball to one of the wing protectors on the field goal, and Dustin Lyman was the guy who caught it from Brad Maynard and scored a touchdown in Lambeau. I think he actually
Oh,
scored 2 touchdowns that day in Lambeau, and might have
look
been
at
the only
that.
touchdowns of his career.
Look at
So,
him.
yeah, so Washington, I do got to say, I'm sorry that they've taken the brunt of this abuse for years. And I guess they do deserve it in a way. They probably should have turned those picks into something a lot better. But at the same time, the Bears really screwed the pooch there.
And I also think if you go back and look at a lot of these teams' drafts, like the way people look at drafts now is completely different. I mean, you saw running back like Ricky Williams go,
Yeah.
number 5 overall. You don't really outside of the Falcons
In
because they
fairness,
still.
Saquon Barkley just went 6 years ago. So,
Yeah, but I think Dave Gettleman would be
um,
somebody that would qualify as a 1999 GM. So,
yeah, that's right. I totally forgot about that, actually.
yeah.
All right, so
But
let me
go
get
with the
back to
next
the
trade.
trades. Yeah. So the 49ers were really, really down. Their dynasty was over after 1998. And they hit rock bottom quick. They had the 3rd pick in the draft. They traded with Washington, their 3rd round pick, for 2 first-round selections and 4th and 5th round selections. So the 12th, the 24th, the 119th, and the 154th. So Washington, if everyone's paying attention, they have the 2nd and 3rd picks in the draft. So
Yeah.
pretty good for them.
And I think
Atlanta,
the 49ers end up trading the pick they got from Washington anyway. At least the number 12
yeah,
pick.
they did.
Yeah.
Atlanta traded with Baltimore. They traded their first round. They had the number 5 pick, and they traded in exchange for their 2nd round choice, the 42nd pick in the 1999 draft, excuse me. So this must have been Atlanta trading up in 1999. They must have been trading their 1st round pick to move up in 1999. I'm guessing
Yes,
that's what that was.
for Reggie Kelly. So Reggie Kelly was the pick for the Falcons in the 98 draft. And just to give you a kind of a quick synopsis of his career, he was a tight end. He played, I want to say 4 seasons with the Falcons, 5 career touchdowns. So I don't think that worked out very well for Atlanta. Atlanta, like, what I think was so funny is like they moved like that was I think they were acting kind of arrogant because like they were coming off of a Super Bowl appearance
Yeah.
the year prior. So they were like, oh, our 1st round pick's going to be late, just completely ignoring the fact that Chris Chandler was your quarterback and like 98 was just a total fluke. Like
They had
that
a
team,
99th percentile outcome season.
yeah, that team, if you go back and like it's still looking at that roster, it's stunning that team went 14-2. I want to say Dan Reeves, like
Dan Reeves.
if you want to say like coach of the year, like lifetime achievement award, that's it.
Ever.
Like that is it.
And
That
it
team
wasn't
didn't
like
have,
they got hot in the playoffs either. They won 14-2.
yeah, they beat the 49ers soundly in the divisional round, but like the Minnesota game was a complete upset. Like they were not really like
Yeah.
if they played Minnesota 100 times, they lose 95 of them, in my opinion. But Gary Anderson misses the kick, the rest is history. And but then they got crushed against Denver in Super Bowl 33. But like I think they were like, oh, we're just a couple of pieces away from putting together a Super Bowl
Doing it
roster.
again.
Yeah, and if you go back and watch like the 99 Falcons highlights, by like week 3, everybody's like, "Oh, this team's a disaster." Like and I think yeah, and then they draft Michael Vick, I think in the '01 class. So and
In
they were the
01.
number
Yes.
I think they traded for that '01. We'll do the '01 episode another day, but I think they
Yeah,
traded for
we
that
will.
pick. If I'm not mistaken.
Then the next pick was the 10th pick of the draft, which is ironic. We were just talking, we talked about the 49ers falling from grace. Atlanta, obviously, they were a one-year wonder. And Denver, their dynasty, well, of course, Elway retired. Terrell Davis got hurt really early in the year in 99. But it's interesting. The teams that dominated, and I'm not trying to say the Falcons dominated the 90s, but the teams that were recently good in 1999 quickly were not good. And that was a weird year in itself, of course, with the Rams winning. But the Broncos traded that pick, the 10th pick, to the Ravens in exchange for their first and second round choices, that 42nd pick that became Reggie Kelly in the 2000 draft. The 12th pick actually saw two different trades. San
We mentioned
Francisco
this.
traded. Sorry.
Yeah, so this trade it was originally belonged to Washington, who
Yes.
traded up to San Francisco. So San Francisco then held the pick.
Yeah.
But San Francisco, excuse me, Washington originally held the pick from Carolina. But you mentioned Sean Gilbert, so you already got to that point. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I'm going backwards. I thought we had missed that.
Even I'm a little bit confused.
Yeah.
Anyways, the Jets were the team that ended up with this pick. And they got this in exchange for, well, they traded the 16th pick and their second round selection. Weren't trades just so much simpler back then? I mean, like,
No, they're not. We literally just did like oh my God, where are we in the trade process?
oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah. But
This
in terms
remind
of like the compensation, like,
yeah,
like nowadays it's like a
pick swap.
this
Yeah.
pick, this pick.
You
Like
got
a
you got to
conditional.
swap picks, yeah,
Yeah.
like
It's
or like will you eat his salary? Da, 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 da. Like
right. Yeah. Now, like back then, it was like, we'll give you our second round pick. Deal.
I just pictured like Ditka. Granted, he was out of the league at this point, but like him sitting in the war room. Like, I don't have time to calculate that. Just
I
give
don't
him
give
no.
a shit about that
Just
stuff.
we want our guy. We want our guy. Give them what they want, and then like the other GM on the phone is like, "We'll just take your entire draft and next year's draft." Is that good? It's like sounds good.
I won't be here anyways.
Yeah. Uh,
The 13th pick of the draft also had a couple different trades. Originally, I think it must have been held. Now I understand how to read this. Originally, it must have been held by San Diego.
yes.
They traded it to Tampa. Tampa traded their 1998 second round pick to San Diego in exchange for a first round pick in 2000.
This would
So that
never
was-
happen anymore. You would
No,
never see
never.
a team trade for a second round pick by giving up their future first. Like if
2
anyone did that
years in the
today,
future. Yeah.
yeah, if anybody did that today, everybody would flip out. Like,
Fired immediately.
yeah, yeah.
So-
It's like because yeah, that's just terrible roster management.
So Tampa held on to this pick for 2 years, technically. And they then eventually traded this pick and their own pick, the 27th pick. Tampa was starting to get good now. Of course, they almost were in the Super Bowl. And they traded it to the Jets in exchange for Keyshawn Johnson out of USC. He was the number 1 pick in the 95 draft. And people were talking about when they were saying that Marvin Harrison might be the number 1 pick of the draft, that Keyshawn Johnson would have been the last number 1. Now, that tells you should not take wide receivers with the first pick of the draft, but even the top 5 is very
It
very
should
difficult.
almost be exclusively a quarterback, unless if it's not a good quarterback class, then you basically pick between the best left tackle or edge rusher, and then
Yeah,
go from
exactly.
there. Like
Really,
the
that's
rest,
what the first 10 picks.
or if you ask Aaron Schatz or
Right.
Schatz, is it
Shots.
Schatz? Yeah, Aaron
Aaron
Schatz. If you
Schatz.
ask him, I learned this and I thought more about this. You could also consider corner. In my opinion, like more because I think a good corner is really hard to find and very important to overall team success. So I think maybe a corner could also, like a Sauce Gardner in the 22 class, like in hindsight, might be worth the first pick.
Look how much money corners are getting now.
Like I think in terms of wins above replacement, I would argue Sauce Gardner is the most valuable player
on
from
the
the
Jets.
22 class. Oh, I think from the 22 draft
Oh,
class.
yes. Yeah, definitely from certainly. By
outside
far.
of Brock Purdy, but nobody saw
Yeah.
that coming. So, anyway, so next pick.
Then the next pick, and this is what we were talking about with the whole Belichick thing. So Belichick, for nobody who may not know this, or anybody who may not know this, I should say, Belichick became and was introduced. Actually, I don't even know if he was introduced as the head coach of the Jets. I think he was just named the head coach of the Jets. And at the press conference the next day, he resigned because the Patriots, they I guess there might have been some sort of tampering, probably because it happened after the fact. But anyways, the Jets were awarded New England's first round selection, the 16th pick of the draft, and their 4th and 7th round selections in 2001 as compensation for the Patriots kind of taking Bill Belichick from the Jets. And New England received the Jets' 5th round selection in 2001 and a 7th rounder in 2002. The 19th pick of the draft was Dallas trading to Seattle. Dallas traded their 1st round selection in their 1st round selection, I think in 2000 and 2001, or 99 and 2000, to Seattle for Joey Galloway, former Ohio State wide receiver. I used him in one of those what do they call those grid things on Pro Football Reference? Immaculate grids. I used Joey Galloway yesterday. I think it was like Tampa Bay Buccaneer wide receivers that also played for or not wide receivers, Tampa Bay Bucks that also played for the Patriots. And I figured everybody would use Brady, and I used Joey Galloway, and it was like 0.4%. So I was like, yes.
Yeah.
And the last trade of the 1st round was Miami trading to Carolina, their 1st round selection, the 23rd pick, in exchange for Carolina's 2nd round selection in 1998. And that became Patrick Surtain.
Yeah. So there's a situation where it actually worked out way better for the team that picked up the 2nd round pick, because Carolina picked a corner. It did not go well.
What do you think all the PFF guys would say, like nowadays, if a team did that?
Oh, they would freak out because like the hit rate of a top 20 pick, because really what you're giving up, like if you can guarantee that you're not going to be like, if you're going to be picking like from 25 to 32, you actually do win the trade. If you're getting the 2nd round, like if you're getting the number 40 pick or the 45th pick in the 24 draft, and knowing you're giving away next year's first that ends up being like the 32nd pick, I think you actually would rather have the 2nd round pick that season, because you're getting that production a year early.
Yeah,
basically. But there's no guarantee, because like if your quarterback gets hurt, or if you just regress as a team and then your pick ends up in the top 10, it's a complete disaster. Because the difference between a top 10 pick and the 32nd pick is like enormous. So in terms of value, like you literally could split like a top 10 pick into like 3 first round picks that are late. So, but yeah, all the PFF guys would, and like anybody on football Twitter at this point would like completely like torch
Yeah.
uh
And
any
rightfully
of
so
these
when you think about
any
it.
of these GMs. But they've gotten, I think, a little bit more advanced. But now, like to me, it's become like kind of hard for anybody to find value. Because we even talk about the Bears and how, like, on paper it looks like they fleeced Carolina. But like and I'm just being hypothetical here, don't get triggered with me. But let's say Caleb Williams
Too
busts
late.
and Bryce Young becomes Drew Brees. Then Carolina wins the trade. Like it's over. It doesn't matter because then Carolina has the good quarterback. But the thing is, like, it doesn't look like that's very likely because Bryce Young looks so bad last year. Like a lot of people have already given it. I'm not giving up on him yet, but like a lot of people have. So, it looks likely that the Bears are going to win that trade by a lot because right now the sentiment is Caleb Williams is going to be the franchise quarterback of the deal and not Bryce Young. And of course, like when Carolina made that trade, they were assuming they're not going to be picking first in the 23 draft or the 24 draft. And
Yeah.
look at them. So like I agree with the consensus that as of right now, the Bears are leading that race. It's not completely over yet because we got to see the returns on Caleb Williams and see the Bryce Young kind of career come to kind of a more complete story. So that's like to me it, and this is kind of a good transition. It's really hard to evaluate these trades and the picks themselves until you're way far out. And I would say we're 24 years out from this draft, so I think we can fairly judge these picks for what they are. Because as of last year, all these picks are now retired.
Yeah.
So I can't believe
Finally.
it took 23 years for them all to stop playing football.
Some guys finished before they even started in 2000, and another guy just finished.
Yeah. Like the guys that we'll get to Tom Brady at the end. Everybody's heard that story already. But we're here to talk about every pick of the first round, and then we'll talk about the notable players that were picked after round 1. So to kind of kick off the draft, like I said, the Cleveland Browns were the laughing stock of the 99 season. So, and they've been the laughing stock of the NFL for like the last quarter century. So they're picking number 1, and they select Courtney Brown, who is a defensive end from Penn State. Brown was one of college football's, he's part of one of the most fearsome front sevens that really we've seen at the collegiate level. If people don't remember those Joe Paterno, and people don't get triggered, but the Jerry Sandusky defenses were awesome at Penn State. And obviously Jerry Sandusky's famous more for some other things, but
Right.
we don't want to talk about that because we all know Jerry Sandusky needs to rot in a jail cell. But that defense was great, and Courtney Brown was a good prospect. But he had a career that really flashed potential early on. But it was for so many of these players, it's like a career that kind of got cut short by injuries. He only played 6 seasons in the NFL, 5 with the Browns and 1 with the Broncos. I do remember him on the Broncos. Like he was fine.
I remember him
But
on the Browns in 2001.
Yeah, I remember because that Broncos team made the AFC title. That's why I remember
Oh,
him.
that's right. Yeah.
Or the AFC title game. But he only finished with 19 career sacks. And looking back, like when you had the first pick in the draft, that leaves you wanting a little bit more.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. The Redskins with the second pick that they acquired they acquired this one via trade. Yes, from New Orleans. They took LeVar Arrington, who, LeVar Arrington's career is kind of weird. Like, I remember, like, when you thought of, like, Terry Tate, office linebacker, and, like, somebody that was intimidating over the middle of the field.
Yeah.
Like, he's obviously not the best linebacker of this draft. Like, we'll get to him in a second. But, like Arrington was like when you thought about like that guy over the middle of the field you didn't want to mess with, like intimidation factor, like he was the guy. Then he have a play where like he injured Troy Aikman or like gave him a concussion like on a really hard hit early.
He might have been the guy that finished his career
Yeah,
because
because
Aikman's career ended in like week 15 of 20 or not 2020, 2000, I should say.
yeah.
Um,
So yeah, and he was also part of that crazy Penn State defense. And
yeah.
a lot of people have basically like had this debate since Michael Parsons came out a couple of years ago. Like it's going to be tough because Penn State under Sandusky and Paterno for a long time were known as linebacker U. Like
Mhm.
Jack Ham, like those kind of like they had a long list of
Yes.
elite linebackers. And it sucks I have to say Jerry Sandusky's name, but he's part of it. But like he but that that school was known for producing that position. And a lot of people have now debated like who was the better like who's the better linebacker? Was it him or Parsons? And like that to me is like one of those fun debates.
Yeah, cool debate for sure.
And right now, like Parsons is winning just because I think like at this point, I'm saying that I'm starting to think Parsons is having a better pro career, but it's still a little early. Um, but Arrington at the beginning of his career was pretty good. He had two second team All Pros, made the Pro
Mhm.
Bowl 3 straight years from 01 to 03, 11 sacks in 2002, which that's what reminded me so much of Parsons. It's like he could play the middle of the field, but he also like could get
Yeah.
after the quarterback too.
Uh,
Um,
a Swedish or yeah, Swedish Army
Swiss
knife
Army knife.
or
Yeah.
Swiss Army knife. Not
Yeah.
Swedish Army.
Swedish Army.
The
They're a little
Swedes
cold.
don't even have an army.
Yeah. This I'm gonna Google Swedish army knife and see if I can order one. But uh
It's probably like a spork or something like that.
in his career though, and LeVar Arrington's like one of these players. Like he had a bunch of injuries like kind of pop up like in the mid 2000s when he was still with the Redskins. Um and in 2006 he signs like this pretty big contract at the time with the Giants and like completely like just fizzles out immediately. And it made me think of like these teams in the 2000s. Like, do you remember like free agency, like being so frustrated that like your favorite team wasn't signing like Albert Hainsworth and like
Yeah,
these
because
kind of,
Washington was
yeah, Washington. Oh, the Giants signed Arrington in '06. So like they're signing all these big name guys, and you're like, man, how are we gonna have a good defense? Like,
yeah,
like
right.
all yeah, and you're sitting there, wait a second, and like the LeVar Arrington, like he's not a bust, but like again, if for the second pick in the draft, I don't know. I feel like I want a little bit more out of that. Um, like, do you have any like? I mean, because you became a fan in '01, so you remember Arrington a little bit, but
Yeah,
like I bet,
I always loved I was always and still am kind of to this day um a big fan of like football aesthetic, and Arrington was the aesthetic of a linebacker. The big pads, he had a great neck pad. Speaking of great neck pads, Chris Samuels next year, great neck pad too. I always loved guys who looked like they should be like tough football players. And LeVar Arrington was like that kind of guy. So
yeah,
I always liked him for that reason, especially.
yeah. I always had the take that he was one of the most overrated players at the time because I was like, everybody just thinks he's cool, and I had this debate specifically, and trust me, like even though I was in like fifth or sixth grade, I was like, Erlacher is so much better than Arrington. Like, and people were like, "Oh no, you kidding? Like, you don't want to go over the middle on Arrington, or like he's basically the Terry Tate office linebacker effect." And I'm like, no, I just watch football, and like Erlacher was so much better. And what I remember having that debate all the time, so it's kind of funny. But Arrington was a good player. I just don't think he was. I think it left you wanting more for the second pick in the draft. Um, so the
Just
third
looking
pick,
at their Penn State team, because wild that one team would send two players at the top two picks in the draft.
both
I always
defensive
knew
players too.
that, yeah, defensive players. I always knew that Tom Brady had like a last minute comeback to beat them in Happy Valley. Go blue. But this is how they finished 10-3, which seems like,
Hmm.
oh, that's an okay season. They won the Alamo Bowl. This is
Yeah.
how close they were to winning a national championship. They were 9-0 going into the going into November. They lost by 1 to Minnesota. They lost by 4 to Michigan. Both of those games were at home. And they lost by a touchdown on the road in East Lansing.
And like Paterno had so many of those types of teams at that point because like even in the mid 2000s,
The
like there were I think
2005 team.
yeah, like they were really good and they had a lot of solid talent. But then like I remember they lost it to Michigan in the last second of the Big House. I
Yeah.
still
Mario
that was a great
Manningham.
great game. But
Never
like
forget that.
but Paterno's teams like they didn't really finish.
No,
So
no, they
yeah,
they seem to, which always begs a coach when that happens. Like, what are their summer programs like?
yeah. But
Just
in
the
terms
same as a team that doesn't start off good. How are they prepared in the summer?
yeah, and like it makes you think like in terms of talent on the defensive side of the ball. I think recently the only thing I could even compare this to is like maybe some of the Georgia teams that
Yeah.
came yeah. And then you made a great point with the Michigan game. That like in hindsight, I go back I because I've watched that game recently and it's like
Mhm.
when Brady led the comeback, it's like, hey, isn't this kind of a flag that Brady's pretty good?
Yeah.
Like maybe
He's
we
doing
should
this against the top two players in the
yeah.
draft, supposedly.
Like, what is Lloyd Carr not seeing? And what is well, he might have been playing at that point, like more because I think towards the end of his college career, Brady's kind of took over.
Yeah.
But like, but it made you think like, what does Lloyd Carr see in Drew Henson? And it made you think like, are these NFL teams just not diving enough into like the details? And it's not like Brady was at like Alcorn State like or anything like that. He was at Michigan, like one of the big brands of college football. It's crazy. But like you brought up that great point about that Michigan game. Third overall, the Redskins had back-to-back picks, so the Texans didn't even accomplish something unique last year with C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson. The Redskins did this in 2000. Um, it's kind of funny. The 23 draft is like has a lot of parallels in terms
Wow.
of
Yeah.
kind of
It is wild how
yeah.
history repeats itself.
Yeah, there's no quarterback. Like last year's quarterback class was awesome. This one's not on paper wasn't great. But the Redskins with back-to-back picks in the top five, they took LeVar Arrington number two. They're gonna take Chris Samuels from Alabama. So a lot of casual fans might be like, "Who? Oh, that pick sucked." Samuels was awesome. He was a big
R-
time hit.
Really solid player.
Franchise left tackle. I think kind of an underrated left tackle because he played in an era where he was competing for all pros and pro bowls with guys
Jonathan
like
Ogden.
Jonathan Ogden, Orlando Pace, Walter Jones. Like
Hmm.
it's hard to even make an all pro team with those guys. But Chris Samuels was awesome. He played all 10 seasons with the Redskins and made Pro
Didn't
Bowls
really
six
miss many
times.
games either until his last season as well.
No, yeah, and I love the stories of a guy that starts his career with one team and finishes it with the same. You don't see that
Mhm.
very often. Uh, Fourth overall pick, the Bengals take Peter Warrick from Florida State, who was pretty electric. I'm not gonna lie. I would have been a big
Yeah.
sucker for Peter Warrick if you like at Florida State. He was great. I think the Bengals just like broke him because like when you think of guys taken to the top five, you think like Calvin Johnson, AJ Green, but like Peter Warrick was not that guy when he got to the NFL. Big star, two-time All-American, three-time All-ACC. But the NFL, he only eclipsed 800 receiving yards once, and that was in 2003. And he was really kind of overshadowed by two 2002 draft picks with Chad Johnson and TJ Hushmanzada.
Who's your mama?
Yeah. TJ Hushmanzada, though, he was a bust with the Seahawks. Like when
He's
he went,
resurfacing now. Do you know why?
because he does, I think he does like QB training or something like, or receiver
He's
training.
Roma Dunze's personal coach.
Yeah, well, yeah, because he trained Drake London too a couple years ago. I
Yes.
remember seeing some videos. So like he's been doing like draft prep. He's like the he's like the Jordan Palmer of wide receivers. So like his Jordan Palmer is like, yeah, I trained him. It's like, who have you not trained? Like,
Right.
it's like every
Just
single
because you
starting
gave them your card.
yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, Jordan Palmer obviously knows about more about quarterback than I do, but it's kind of funny how that seems to work. Um, fifth overall. So I think we would say right now the only like slam dunk pick in the top five has been Chris Samuels.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think the Ravens knocked a home run too at the
Yeah.
fifth pick. Jamal Lewis, a really physical runner out of Tennessee. He made an impact immediately when he got to
Yeah.
Baltimore.
Helped them win a Super Bowl right
Yeah, he
away.
played a key role. He was like one of the three Lewises because everybody remembers Ray. Then there was Jamal. You
And
remember the
Michael.
third? Was it Michael or Jermaine?
Oh, Jermaine. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Jermaine.
Jermaine Lewis.
Why was Jermaine Lewis? Why do I remember Jermaine Lewis for another reason?
Jermaine Lewis scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl because
Yes.
that funny thing about that game too. So the Giants' only touchdown in that game was Ron Dixon's had a kickoff return for a touchdown. They lost like 35-7, right?
That game was on TV today, believe it or not.
Why would anyone want to watch that?
I know it was on Super Bowl Classics on.
It's not a classic. It's the worst Super Bowl ever. Like outside of the Broncos Seahawks, that was the worst. Like in terms of unless you're a fan of the team that won, there's nothing like entertaining about that game. It was dominated. But Ron Dixon scored a touchdown in that game for the Giants. And it's like if you're a Giants fan, like finally we have something to celebrate. Jermaine Lewis scores a touchdown on a kickoff return, literally the next play. Like, talk about depressing. Like, oh man. But Jamal Lewis, not Jermaine or Ray, but Jamal played a key role in that Super Bowl 35 run with the Ravens. In 2003, he even ran for 2,000 yards, which doesn't happen all that often, unless you're Derrick Henry, I guess. He finished his career in Cleveland in 2009, but he had a really solid career for 10 seasons. So he would
I
have
always
been,
remember the 2003 season he had. That was an unreal season. It started off great right away. He set like the NFL single game rushing record, I think like in week 1. And then
yeah.
he had another big game week 2.
I
Really
think he
helped
did it
the
against Cleveland.
Ravens. Yes, who he eventually ended up with. It was it propelled them to win the division that year.
Yeah. And I think, because I remember I think he broke it was it Sunday night, where he got over 2,000 yards. The old Sunday Night Football with like Mike Patrick and them. So like he was just one of those like downhill runners. If he got he was kind of like the predecessor, I feel like, to Derrick Henry, like that type of runner where like if he got ahead of steam, like you're not going to get him down.
No.
And he was fast too. So that was like the underrated thing about him early in his career. I even remember him in 2007 when he was with the Browns. He had he played a pretty big role on that team that went 10-6.
They won 10-6. Yeah.
Yeah, they missed the playoffs because it's Cleveland. So even though they have a 10-6 season, they don't even make the playoffs. Go figure.
Remember, by 2020, when 2020 rolled around, that was their best season since coming back from. I know they made the playoffs in 2002, but 2007 was a better season.
Yeah, and they made that season made Derek Anderson a lot of money. So good for everybody involved.
Derek Anderson was playing 11 years after that. Do you remember he played that Monday Night Football game?
He got mad because he was laughing. Yeah, he was laughing on the sideline, and a reporter asked him, "I take this crap seriously." Yeah, that was classic.
Oh man.
The sixth pick of the draft, the Eagles take Corey Simon. Simon was, I think, a good, solid player. He played a key role on Florida State's national championship team in '99. He was a defensive tackle. I would say he lived up to his draft billing, being a first rounder, made a Pro Bowl, and then he even won a Super Bowl on his next contract when he was with the Colts.
Yeah.
he was solid, but he didn't necessarily like move the needle, I guess, for,
No,
you know,
his production warranted more of like you would be delighted if he was a second or third round pick.
yeah.
Um, but I guess in fairness, sometimes if a guy plays for you for 5 years and he starts, that's
I mean,
probably as good as you can hope for sometimes.
he's a D tackles. So, and like,
Yes, he's a D tackle, yeah.
yeah.
And he
Uh,
helped Jim Johnson's defenses quite a
yeah.
bit. So
Yeah. He was, I think, solid. He just, a lot of people don't remember Corey Simon as much. Um,
yeah.
but he was, I think that would be a solid pick. Uh, the seventh pick, Cardinals take Thomas Jones, running back from
TJ,
Virginia. And Jones was a bust
he
for
was.
Arizona. He had some kind of fluke injuries. One was he broke his hand picking up a phone, apparently. I don't know
Huh.
how that works.
I didn't ever heard that one.
Yeah, I like, yeah, I read that when I was doing my research. So like when he was on the Cardinals, he like injured his hand while he was at home picking up a phone. I'm like, how do you pick up a phone? Because like I'm trying to figure that out. Like, how do you manage that? I'm sure that really happened. We'll never know. But he had a career kind of renaissance. I like to say that he was like the early version of Cedric Benson. For those that are listening to this, Cedric Benson was a running back for the Bears who was pretty
Drafted to compete
disappointing.
with him.
Yeah, and he was drafted to compete, ironically, with Thomas Jones. Very disappointing as a Bear. Then he goes to Cincinnati and has like a career
Oh
renaissance
God, don't ever
and
mention that again.
has a really great season. But Thomas Jones, like he was really solid for near about 7-8 years when he was with the Bears and the Jets, and
Hmm.
even had a little bit of a run as kind of the early down back to the rookie Jamal Charles.
Yeah.
So, yep. Uh, in Kansas City, uh, eighth pick of the draft, the Steelers take Plaxico Burress from Michigan State. He had a good start to his career in Pittsburgh. They played on a couple playoff teams. I still think like he was
It was great till he shot himself in the leg.
well, he did that with the Giants, but
Yeah.
I, he was not like and I felt bad for him in the mid 2000s. Like, so he signs with the Giants in '05, and the Steelers win the Super Bowl like immediately as soon as he leaves.
Yeah,
Like,
that's right.
and Antoine Randall and Hines Ward like played the key role in the Super Bowl
Yeah.
with the what was it, the touchdown pass from Randall to Hines Ward. Um, so like I kind of felt bad at the time, but then Plaxico ended up just torching Al Harris in the NFC Championship, and
I
I
was just
regret.
gonna say, do you think Al Harris ever sees him in his nightmares?
Dude, I still do, and I didn't play in the game. I if you want to watch like a lot of people like on draft Twitter, like people that play a lot of dynasty fantasy football and things like that. Like every year the draft comes out, and like there's these types of people, and I like to include myself as one of those people. Like they're the sizest, right? They're the people like a receiver that fall in love with the 6'4" guys. Forget Plexico Burris is like the reason I love those type of players because like when they are good, like he was, you cannot put a corner on him and stop him, man. Like you can't play man to man defense because
Yeah.
he's just gonna run over you. Like, and he did that in that NFC Championship game. Al Harris couldn't play with him. Like he just went up and got every pass. Like Eli didn't really have to. He just like aimlessly like think of Eli with his aimless face, right? Just kind of going, huh, I'll
Hmm.
throw it that way, and then
Flex over there somewhere.
yeah, basically, and that's kind of how it worked. And he did the same thing to the Patriots late in the game, in the Super Bowl. So Plaxico, I think, out of every player not named Tom Brady in this draft, he probably had the biggest mark on NFL history.
Hmm.
Um, and you could maybe this guy right after him, also had a big mark, but he didn't win the Super Bowl, so that's why I said Plaxico over him in terms of NFL history. Now, this is the second best player in this draft.
Yeah.
The Bears
Certainly.
took.
Go
Or go
ahead.
ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. The
Did
Bears
you
take.
ever hear the Mike Francesca when like somebody would call in to WFAN in New York and you'd go they'd say something like hey, Mike, first time, long time. And he'd go ahead.
Well, I love that he would ask like, "Hey, did you watch that badminton tournament last week?" I'll hang up and listen.
Or they'd ask him about Jason Giambi.
One of these days, I'm gonna call it. No. What we should do is we should do a live stream where we call in to the Mike Francesa show.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and then we like have a list of questions that we have for Mike, and like I'm trying to think. We're going way off topic here, but like, what would it be like? Hey, did you see Roger Clemens playing for the Savannah Bananas last week? Like it would be like that kind of question, and he would just be like, Savannah Bananas. What the heck's that? Like Savannah has a minor league team or something? Like,
John Starks playing for the Harlem Globetrotters. The hell is this guy talking about?
John Starks, he was always a punk anyway. So, anyway, we're getting back on topic here. So the Bears at the 9th pick, they take Brian Urlacher from New Mexico, and I'll let you talk about his career in Chicago because
Yeah, so Urlacher was I actually was at Urlacher's last game technically. It was Seattle 2012, and I didn't see his last play was the last play of the game. I had already left the stadium. So I technically wasn't in the stadium to see the last play, but Urlacher had an unbelievable career, and I didn't really I guess it didn't really dawn on me how good he was until after his career was over and his Hall of Fame um, induction was imminent. And then I started kind of researching him again and kind of going back and watching him because by the end of Urlacher's career, he was a whiner. Clear, like, he would whine about the fans booing. He was slow. He always seemed grumpy. So in some ways, we were kind of tired of him, and you forgot how great he was. He was amazing. And it wasn't like, some people they remember 2001, he made his first all-pro team, and the Bears had signed Keith Traylor and Ted Washington to play in front of him. So a lot of people thought that like that made him, like that year made him. It didn't though, because if you watch his rookie year, he was unreal. He was the only good player. Go back, it's on YouTube. Go back and watch the Bears and Vikings Sunday Night Football game in 2000. Urlacher was by far the best player on the field for the Bears that day. I mean, it wasn't saying much, but he was great from the start. And then when Lovey took over in 2004, Urlacher battled a few injuries that year, but he came back. He was the NFL Defensive Player of the Year in 05 and 06. He was one of the top players in the league. He was made for that Tampa 2 defense. He was in all intents and purposes an incredible player. So athletic. So athletic. He ran, I was texting you, I remember a few weeks ago. What did he run at the combine? He ran a 4.59 40-yard dash. This is a white 6'4". Obviously, he played safety, but that tells you how athletic he was. He played safety in college. He played tight end in college.
Yeah, so I was going to bring up his college stat line because his college career was like one of the craziest you'll ever see. He played at New Mexico, so he played. I guess back then they were still the Mountain West. So his college career, 442 career tackles. So he's basically averaging well over 100 per season. 3 picks, 11 sacks, 11 forced fumbles, 6 touchdown catches, and 5 kickoff returns for touchdowns. So like it's the 5 kickoff returns for touchdowns from a guy that played linebacker in the NFL. That's what gets me. Like, it's like, wait a second. Like all these other things, it's like, oh, he can rush the passer. He's getting guys over the middle. He's going to play linebacker at the NFL level. Oh, and also he outran everybody on kickoffs.
Well, when you think about, he had a couple memorable long touchdowns in the NFL.
Yeah.
He had 3 touchdowns that were more than 30 yards in the NFL.
I remember he had one against us in 2007 where
he picked
Favre off. It was like a
Yeah.
90-yard touchdown.
And
And he nearly had one in the
I
2010 NFC
know.
Championship
I
game, but he
know.
got tackled.
I still have that in my like he was
If
God.
Aaron Rodgers doesn't trip him up, it's a touchdown, and that game completely flips on its
The
head.
game, yeah, because he would have gone 100 yards. Soldier Field would have flipped.
Yeah. And you know, the Packers under McCarthy, like they melt when the pressure gets going on them. But yeah, so obviously like A+ pick from the Bears here. You draft the first ballot Hall of Famer. You can't go wrong there. But you didn't draft Brady, so haha.
He would have sucked anyways for the Bears.
They did draft a quarterback. Did they draft Spurgeon Wynn? I think is who.
No,
they
the
draft.
Bears didn't draft Spurgeon Wynn.
Who did they? I think the Browns drafted. Did y'all not draft
Yeah,
the quarterback?
Yeah. No, the Bears didn't. You're probably thinking of Cade McNown in '99.
Okay. Yeah. So y'all didn't have one of the Brady 6, so that's good.
No, thank God.
So the 10th
We
pick.
have one of the Mahomes 3.
That's so annoying. Like, okay, first of like, not to stop because it's gonna take us like 2 hours to get through this.
I know.
Like, I hate hearing that, number one, about like, oh, the Mahomes 3. He went like in the top 10. Like, can we stop acting like the whole league doubted him? The Brady 6, Brady went 199. There's a difference.
Right.
The entire league passed on Brady like 7 times or 5 times before the Patriots finally took him with a compensation pick at the end of the 6th round. Like, it wasn't even the middle part of the 6th round, at the beginning of the 6th round. It was at the very end of the 6th. Like, he's getting drafted where roster clogger running backs or special teams players go. Yeah.
Insurance agents.
Yeah. Or just practice squad guys that, they're just trying to get into the league for a couple of years. They draft I'm just going to say it. It was a freaking fluke that they got Brady where they did. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, that shouldn't have happened. And everybody knows that. The whole Chiefs, the Bears the Bears misevaluated Trubisky, but quarterback is the hardest position to evaluate. And the other thing is the Chiefs traded up for a reason to get Mahomes because they weren't the only freaking team that was on him, by the way. Like, the Saints wanted him. Yeah. Sean Payton is it's widely known Sean Payton was going to trade up to get Mahomes. Like, it was going to happen because he wanted an heir apparent to Drew Brees. Well, that's why the Chiefs traded up, because they know Sean Payton wanted him. So
that's right.
There you go. And I think the Saints would have been in position to take Mahomes because I think they sucked in 2016. So that's the team the Chiefs jumped. So let's not pretend the Chiefs were the only people and the only team that were in on Mahomes. It was not the case, and I hear that every year. And the Chiefs fans are getting more obnoxious the more they win Super Bowls. It's going to get 5 times worse because they're about to win like 7 more. Yeah. So congratulations. I think Mahomes is. Yeah, I don't think he was the best last year. I think Josh Allen was the best quarterback in the league last year. But over the last 5 years, there's no doubt, and I don't disagree at all, that Mahomes is the best quarterback in the NFL, and he will probably be that for the next 5 years. I'm not doubting that, but I get so annoyed with that talking point. Like, I just had to bring it up. Good. So, not to go off a tangent, but that's what we did. Let's roll through these next couple.
Yeah.
Travis Taylor to the Ravens. Basically the Gators version, or the Florida Gator version of Peter Warrick. Just disappointing career for a top 10 pick. Played for the Vikings and the Rams as well.
Yeah.
Giants take Heisman winner Ron Dayne. So Ron Dayne had 7,125 career rushing yards at Wisconsin, which is, I think, the most all time at the FBS level. We probably will never see that again because guys, declare early and all that crap now. Like, if they're that productive in college.
And nobody's that much of a bell cow.
Yeah, the only numbers you'll see break that are like the Jaleel McLaughlins of the world. Like, they broke that, but they didn't play FBS. Like, he played Division 3, Division 2. I think it was Division 2 in FCS where he combined he had like 10,000, but he also played like 5 seasons. Ron Dayne never eclipsed 1,000 yards in his 8 seasons with the Giants, Broncos, and Texans. So, wild. Ron Dayne is a college legend, one of the great running backs in the history of college football, one of the biggest busts in NFL history. The Jets take Sean Ellis from Tennessee. He was like a staple of their interior defensive line under Herm Edwards, Eric Mangini, and most
You know what I
notably Rex.
remember about Sean Ellis?
What's that?
Pick sixing Trent Edwards in 2008.
Yeah, I forgot about that. He had a really solid career, two-time
He
Pro
did.
Bowler. I always remember him as like one of the staples for Rex Ryan, like when he first got there.
Mhm.
Like everybody remembers Revis, obviously, and like Kerry Rhodes, like those kind of players.
Yeah.
But like I always remembered Sean Ellis. And the Jets had some pretty good defenses, even like under Herm Edwards. Like they had Jonathan Vilma. Uh, you know, I think you had Sean Ellis, of course, John Abraham, who is the next pick, by the way, 13th overall from South Carolina. The crazy stat that I came up with John Abraham, we know he was a great, this was a big time hit, borderline Hall of
Yeah.
Famer, I would argue.
Hall very good at least. Yeah.
Yeah, three-time All-Pro, five-time Pro Bowls, 133 and a half career sacks with the Jets, Falcons, and Cardinals. A lot of people would make the case for a Hall of Fame. I think the craziest thing I would sell about John Abraham as a football player, though, is he managed to be second team All SEC. Do you know South Carolina's record in 1999? His final
Um,
season there.
I don't know, 5-7.
0-11.
Wow.
They didn't win a single game in 99.
That
So
that
like
was like Cortez Kennedy winning Defensive Player of the Year for the Seahawks, and they were 2-14.
yeah, so like yeah, that shows you like they and he's playing in the SEC, so it's not like he was in a bad conference. Like they're really good players. So when Abraham did that, it shows you how good he was. And in college, and like it kind of transitioned to the pros. I think what hurts him is the fact that he did it on like three different teams, and like
Yeah.
those three different teams, they never really like made it to the. He did, I guess, technically. I think he did play in a Super Bowl. Um, or no, I
He
don't
played
think
in
he
the
did.
NFC Championship, I think,
Yeah,
with
with
the
the Falcons.
Falcons.
I think by the time the Falcons went back to the Super Bowl or went in 16, I think he was already on the Cardinals at that point.
No, I
So
think he was retired by 16.
was he? I'm
Yeah.
thinking of Dwight Freeney was on that team.
Dwight
Was on
Freeney,
the
yeah.
yeah. But
Do you
yeah, but
know
the
what's really cool about John Abraham? So I recently found a video on YouTube of Urlacher being interviewed by Mike North, who anybody who from Chicago would remember. Mike North used to be well, I think he's still making podcasts somewhere, but a very big radio personality in the 90s and early 2000s. Like a typical Chicago accent. And he was interviewing Urlacher, and one of the things he said to Urlacher was, "Who do you think is like the best player else besides you in this draft?" And Urlacher said, "John Abraham." And he was like, "Really?" He was like, "Is where is he from again?" And Urlacher's like, "Defensive end from South Carolina." He was like, "I seen him at the Senior Bowl, and he's crazy good."
Yeah,
So
Urlacher seems like a guy like if he had become a scout, he would have been pretty good at it.
yeah, he'd
Um,
know what to look for.
so we'll roll through a couple more of these. So Packers select at 14th overall Bubba Franks, tight end from Miami.
Solid
Uh,
pick.
this was a replacement for Mark Chmura, who had his issues, legally speaking.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
that's right.
soon, yeah, with the we won't get into all that, but like,
Well, you
Franks
got
was
into it with Sandusky. No,
well, yeah, Sandusky's a little more known than Chmura
right.
is. But like Franks was Favre's favorite red zone target from
Mhm.
2000 to 2007. Kind of crazy thing about Franks is like he was never really like a volume like receiver, but he had 32 career touchdowns on only 262 career catches. So he was basically averaging like 15% touchdown like of his career catches, which is like a crazy high number.
Yeah.
Uh, and he also followed Favre to the Jets, so he never caught a pass, like or at least like from a starter. Like he never started a game that Brett Favre didn't start in the NFL.
Crazy.
Yeah, because Favre's streak I think extended all the way through 2010, so
Yeah.
he was there for basically the entire time. But like Favre was in every game Bubba Franks played in. Um, And at the 15th spot, Deltha O'Neal from Cal had
Very
a
good.
he was good and like he was okay for the Broncos, but like he ended up, I think he made more of a name for himself with the Bengals.
Yeah, and the Bengals. That's where I actually forgot he was on the Broncos. I remember him more with the Bengals.
Yeah, and he was like one of the cornerstone pieces of that 2005 and AFC North
Marv
championship season.
Lewis.
Yep. And Marv Lewis Marvin Lewis deserves a little credit like in hindsight. That the Bengals in like the early 2000s were a disaster of a team, and he did, like, to his credit, he got them to where they were
They lost the
contending.
most games of any team in the 90s.
Yeah. And people made fun of him because like they really could not close they could not get a playoff win to save their life while he was there. Like Adam Jones made sure of that. But like the but he deserved a lot of credit for how well he coached those teams, and like he got them out of where they were. I think the turnaround Zach Taylor did is nothing compared to what Marvin Lewis had to do, in my opinion. Um, the 16th pick, the Niners draft Julian Peterson, just kind of like Deltha O'Neal, like another solid career. Julian
Mhm.
Peterson was he was more of an edge rusher, like an outside linebacker. Had a solid career, first team All Pro in 2003, second team in 2002. Uh, Played pretty well when he was with the Seahawks. So like he had a solid career, but just I don't I think that I would consider it like a single. He wasn't great, but he was for the 16th pick, you could do way worse for sure. This is the pick that I wish we had Twitter for. It's the 17th pick of this 2000 draft. The Raiders
Oh yeah.
select Sebastian Janikowski at the 17th pick. Like, and I can you imagine like what the press conference was like? So,
Sebastian Janikowski is it?
yeah, so I guess it was Paul Tagliabue back then. Like, went the 17th pick in the 2000 NFL draft. The Oakland Raiders select Sebastian Janikowski, kicker, and like when he says he's going to emphasize kicker, Florida State, and like the crowd is going like, whoa. And you have like Rich Eisen or Chris Berman going like, oh, kickers are people too. And like you didn't like all of that. And just like, and you're a Raiders fan, like watching the TV, and you're just like, okay, I'm done. Done.
I
This is like
forgot he ended in Seattle.
yeah. And this pick gets laughed at, but he did have one of the longest careers with the team that drafted him,
Yeah.
which you would hope is you're drafting a kicker in the first round. It's like, he better be good. But like Davis, I think the kicking game like wasn't where it is now. Like, okay, guys that make 50+ yard field goals now are like a dime a dozen. They all do it. I didn't think that was the case back then. Like Janikowski was a real weapon. Now picking him in the first round, that's a little crazy. But what it made me think, going back, I don't think teams valued their first round picks like they do now. I
Yeah.
don't think I didn't think it was as important to them in terms of their team building because like now you basically like most of these teams they don't even consider certain positions until like day three.
Well,
Um,
it's I think it has to do with the fact that um there's such little practice time and such little like there's no so like there's no point in like you're not hoping that you're like years ago your fourth round pick was still an investment because you'd get 60 practices with him before his first game of the season. Now you get like 30 or 25 practices and maybe half of them are full pads, you know? And it's just a totally different world. Since the 2011 CBA, I think that was when I think that, and of course the rookie wage scale. I think
yeah,
those two things have affected the those kind of guys and the way teams have gone about their first round picks.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. Like, so it's definitely fun to laugh at, but this was also 25 years ago. This to me, this shows you how different the draft was compared
Mm.
to today. That a kicker and like just, Seabass, he had a pretty good career. But what's funny is he wasn't even the best specialist in the draft for the Raiders. Um, they take a guy in the fifth round that
They took
arguably might,
Leckler?
yeah, and Leckler might be a Hall of Famer. Um, so at the 18th pick, the Jets take Chad Pennington, who's the first quarterback taken in the draft. So this is like on paper looking exactly like the Kenny Pickett draft, like taking a noodle armed quarterback and not even like around the 20th pick. But this was a good choice though. I like Pennington. Like
I always liked Pennington too.
I think he was super accurate, and I think he would have had a Drew Brees like career if he didn't have that shoulder injury. Like Brees' shoulder injury kind of worked out, and Pennington's didn't. And you could tell by the end of Pennington's career, he like just didn't have the zip on the ball that he needed to function at the NFL level.
I think he would have done really good if he came into the league 15 years later.
Yeah. And it's so poetic that the Jets, they take a good quarterback in the draft. They took a good player, but of course it doesn't work out and it gets overshadowed by the Patriots. That's the Jets. That's the Jets. The 19th pick, the Seahawks take Sean Alexander. He was drafted to replace an aging Ricky Waters, and he didn't disappoint. In 8 years with the Seahawks, he ran for over 9,400 yards, 100 touchdowns. He had 10,000 all-purpose and 112 all-purpose touchdowns.
Won an MVP.
Won MVP in 2005, and he had 27 rushing touchdowns that season. And what's kind of crazy about his career is like he had he was awesome in 05. Like you said, he won the MVP. And then like 3 years later, he's like out of football.
Yeah. I remember him being a free agent in 2008 and wanting the Bears to sign him because I was 12 years old and I didn't know much about where you should allocate money.
I learned quickly, like I think that's the moment as a fan where I realized running backs were not like super important investment pieces.
Yeah.
Because like, so in 07, we had Ryan Grant like have his breakout season. Ryan Grant was a practice squad player with the Giants, and the Packers signed him to the active roster. And then he basically goes out and nearly has 1,000 yards in 07. In 08, like Sean Alexander's a free agent. And I'm sitting there like, we ought to sign Sean Alexander. We need to start, like, we can't just rely on Ryan Grant. And then like I watched Ryan Grant, like I think I remember not Ryan Grant, Sean Alexander play in 08. Like I saw a couple of his, I think he only played like 1 or 2 games that season for the Redskins. And I was like, woof. I was like, this guy's not even close to what he was. Yeah. And it just like it made me think like, wow, these guys can fall off fast at running back once they lose a little juice. And it's like, and you see that all the time now. And it makes you appreciate players like Derrick Henry, like the guys that have been able to stick till they're 30 years old and be pretty productive. Like that's not normal. Like more guys are like Sean Alexander where they just fade. And like you can't explain why. So at the 20th position, the Lions draft Stockar McDougal.
I don't remember him at all.
He was a left tackle from Oklahoma. No Pro Bowls or all pro teams. Not a bust necessarily. He started 56 games for Detroit. He was just, I think, a solid starter, but disappointing, I think, for a first round pick. I don't know if I'd call him a bust, but because he played. He wasn't like Isaiah Wilson or anything like that.
Yeah.
Fun fact: he's cousins with Tommy Harris. So there you go.
Oh.
I always remember this pick because it's like this was like so Chiefs for the early 2000s. They take Sylvester Morris, 21st overall from Jackson State, and he had 48 career receptions for less than 700 yards, and he was out of the league by 2006. Like
that was it.
The Chiefs in the early 2000s were like horribly run. Like their fans now, like Like, just appreciate Andy Reid. That's all I'm saying. Like,
Mhm.
because before Andy Reid, this was like the podunk, like dummy team. Like the only team worse than them were probably the Lions and the Raiders in terms of drafting, and like just every move they made was stupid. And drafting a guy from Jackson State, I couldn't find his stats from Jackson State, but this he didn't produce. We'll say that. Chris McIntosh went to the Seahawks. He was a left tackle from Wisconsin. Only 3 career seasons. He had neck injuries that retired him early. So you kind of get an incomplete there for the Seahawks. Um, he's also now the AD at Wisconsin right now. So
Oh,
he's, I guess, found success in athletic administration. So good for him.
so he hired Chris Fickle then.
Yeah, I guess so. I didn't check what year he started, but I'd imagine he was involved.
Yeah,
in
he
that
would have
decision.
taken off. He would have taken over for Barry Alvarez.
Yeah. Uh, was Barry Alvarez? Did he just retire?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Yeah, because Wisconsin doesn't have any cheating scam. I'm thinking of Philip Fulmer was the AD at Tennessee, and they had the
Yes.
McDonald's. They had the McDonald's cash bags. That was great. That was like that scandal might be my favorite of all time of any college number one.
The
It's
Ohio
just
State tattoo scandal too.
no, but like there is nothing better than a good SEC cheating story, like because at number one, like Ohio State, to give them credit, like when they cheat, like they still win. Like when Tennessee cheats, you're still Tennessee. Like, why are you risking everything just to win 10 games? Like,
Right.
like
You can't get
they,
past Alabama or
oh,
Florida.
but the Tennessee fans think like, they think they're a big brand in college football, and like they're like a blue blood, and I'm like, you were like a blue blood once when you had Peyton Manning. Like, let's slow down here. Like, I get it. Peyton Manning was awesome. Reggie White's great. Like, those are two like first ballot Hall of Famers, like NFL legends. But like, slow down. You're not Alabama. You're not even Georgia. So they're in like kind of the Florida club. Like they think they're better than they are. Like Florida fans are the worst when it comes to that.
Yeah.
Like Florida fans think that like they should just be running over the SEC every year, and if they don't, they need to fire their coach. When in reality, it's like you struck gold when you hired Spurrier, and then you struck even more gold when you hired Urban Meyer.
Yeah,
Like,
and now you're back to where you
yeah,
were
but those
supposed to be.
coaches don't just come around and like they just and those coaches both left you for other jobs.
Yeah,
So they told you what they think of you like when they did that. So
right.
yeah. But the Panthers at the 23rd pick, they take Rashard Anderson. Funny that I'm trying to think, this might be the last time, or maybe the only time, that one FCS program, or back then it was one AA, had 2 first-round draft choices. Because
Ironically, Jackson State had 2 first-round draft choices in 1975.
but yeah, Walter Payton and
Who was was it Brazil?
yeah, but everybody remembers Walter Payton. So
Yeah.
so it was Jackson State both times that did that.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm shocked you know that just off the top of your head. That's awesome.
There's a reason.
We'll do the 75 redraft. But Rashard Anderson, Jackson State, went to the Panthers. And remember, they basically traded the rights to Patrick Surtain Sr. to draft Rashard Anderson. So on paper, they're getting a first round pick back for a second. So you're like, yeah, great value until they become players. And he only had one pick in 3 seasons with Carolina, and I think he played 1 year in the CFL, only 2005. So he was a bust. The 49ers select Ahmed Plummer from Ohio State.
Him.
He's a corner. He flashed in 2001, but he had a lot of injuries. He was out of the league by 2005. I remember this guy pretty well. Chris Hovan, 25th.
He and Favre had a rivalry, didn't they?
Yeah, I used to always call him Walmart Warren Sapp because like he was just like the less good version of Warren Sapp, like in terms of like talking trash to Favre.
Yeah. He
but,
got
like,
arrested recently, actually.
Did he for what?
Like a DWI and I think like child neglect or something like that.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a few years ago.
Yeah, but he was kind of like he was one of those like we were talking about the the kid, and I think I just think of him because he went to Florida State, but the kid that I want to say the Rams drafted him, or the kid from Florida State, the D tackle. But I think
When
of
did
like
they do that? Oh, I know who you're talking. The guy they just drafted.
yeah,
Braden.
Braden something.
Yeah.
Fisk.
This.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Braden Fisk. But they but like just kind of just a nasty D tackle. But Chris Hovan, he went to Boston College, not Florida State. I don't know why I kept thinking of Florida State. But
Same tint of red.
yeah, I guess. But he was a solid career interior run stopper for Minnesota, and he did play for Tampa. Which and like Greg Gaines reminds me of that too. I don't know why. But
Former Chicago Bear.
yeah. So
He
uh
died. He died. You know.
Greg Gaines?
Yeah, he died. He played
No,
1 year for the Bears.
I'm thinking of like the guy that played currently, Greg
Oh
Gaines.
no. Oh, who am I thinking of?
There's a guy that plays for the Bucks right now that's named Greg Gaines. That he was on the Rams.
I'm thinking of Gaines
Gaines Adams.
Adams,
Yeah, Gaines Adams went to
who also
Clemson.
played for the Bucks.
Yeah, but and Gaines Adams was a top 5 pick. So
That's right.
yeah, but then he got traded to the Bears and he had like a heart condition that no one saw
Yeah.
coming. Yeah, that was sad. I remember when that happened.
Yeah.
26th overall pick, Eric Flowers, defensive end from Arizona State. I'm just gonna put it bluntly, he was not Terrell Suggs. 127 or the first pick or 27th pick of the draft. I am losing my mind here. Anthony Becht, kind of a career journeyman, tight end with the Jets, Bucks, Rams, Cardinals, and Chiefs. So that's a lot of teams. Fun fact for him, current head coach of the St. Louis Battlehawks. So he's made a career in
Oh.
coaching.
They have a good team.
At 28th overall, RJ Soward. Soward, I don't know how to say it. He didn't have a big career, obviously. Wide receiver from USC. This is the first of like a run. Jacksonville has a type, or at least they used to, where they would draft like first round receivers and they all had a ton of problems. So you had RJ Soward, Matt Jones, or Matt Coke Zero Jones, and you had Justin Blackman. And like none of them like did anything in the league because they all had like alcohol or drug problems, right? And Soward had 14 career receptions. And it got so bad apparently that Tom Coughlin had a limo pick him up every day so he'd show up to practice. And that happened in the NFL. Like that's Jacksonville, like I said, I mean, like it's just some of these teams, it's like they make the same mistakes that they've been making for 20 years. It's just crazy. 30th pick of the draft, Keith Bullock goes to the Titans. He was a really good player. Staple for Jeff Fisher's defense throughout the 2000s. He was like, because everybody remembers like Urlacher and, you know, people remember like obviously Ray Lewis. Like Keith Bullock kind of just gets like forgotten about. But he was a solid pro. Like when you think of good linebackers, like solid linebackers, he even made a couple all pro teams, like years that maybe Lewis and Urlacher missed some games. Bullock was right there as one of the league's best. And the head scratching pick of the round, and there were a couple, but this one really got me, was the Rams select Trung Candidate, who was a running back from Arizona. This was a sort of a head scratcher because they used a first round pick, and you have to think about who was on their team already. You had Marshall Faulk, right?
Yeah.
And you use a first round pick on a running back. So, like, to me, this was easily a case of Mike Martz trying to be the smartest guy in the room.
Yeah.
100%. It's like,
if our friend Jim is listening, we still want Mark or Mike on the show, but
yeah, but I think like this is just my take on it. And I think that's kind of how I look at it is like why are you spending first round capital on a guy that's like not going to see the field? Like you didn't have committee backs that much back then.
No.
Yeah, like that was a big head scratcher.
And they needed defensive help.
Yeah, he started 3 games in 3 seasons with St. Louis. He won a starting gig finally in Washington when Steve Spurrier was the coach.
Remember
but
that.
he soon lost that job to Clinton Portis in 2004. So that's the first round. We had 31 picks, like I said. Some other notable picks I'll just run down if you have any comments, and then we'll get to the main event here at the very end. Marvell Smith to the Steelers, 38th overall in the second round. Mike Brown to the Bears in the second
Oh,
round.
my first favorite player.
Mike Brown,
He would have been Troy Polamalu if he stayed healthy.
he had
I
a
truly
knack
believe
of
that.
finding the ball. Like
Yeah, big
certain
play, Mike.
players, just certain players are just always around the ball. And if you want to watch like some amazing plays, just watch Mike Brown's 2001 highlights with Chicago.
Yeah,
It's awesome.
magic.
Chad Clifton to the Packers, franchise left tackle for
I didn't realize he was drafted in 2000. I thought it was like '02 he was drafted.
no, and they cleaned up in that draft too. Because I want to say Mark Tauscher. I didn't even list him on this, but I got to double check that now. But I think Mark Tauscher was drafted in 2000. Uh, yeah. So I didn't even list Mark Tauscher on here. So they got Clifton and Tausch in the same draft. Neither one in the first round, and they were basically bookend tackles for them for the entire decade.
Yeah,
Because they
that's
didn't. Yeah, they drafted Bulaga in 2010, and Bulaga replaced Tauscher basically 1-for-1, and then Bulaga basically played the entire 2010s with us. And Clifton played on the 2010 Super Bowl team. He was a starter, and then he got hurt in 2011. They had Derek Sherrod. He was going to be like the guy, but he broke his femur in the Chiefs game that we lost in the 15-1 season. And and then they finally drafted, I think they went like a year where they were like playing randoms like Don Barclay. I don't know if you remember him or not.
yeah.
But then they finally get David Bakhtiari. But the Packers have drafted like a big number of franchise left tackles and right tackles over the last 20 years. And none of them have been in the first, like, not that many of them have been first round picks. Like Bulaga, and, we'll see about Jordan Morgan, but like they've got a type and it seems to be working. So good for them. I have some guy named Marcus. Who did I write there for? I gotta one
That
second.
would be Marcus Washington.
Marcus, yeah. I wrote Marcus Washington and then I deleted Washington to write Redskins. Okay, that's what happened. But Marcus Washington to the Redskins in the second round. Lavernius Coles to the Jets in the third round. He was a solid player, and I think like 1-for-1, you kind of drafted a replacement for Keyshawn Johnson's. I think the Jets actually had one of their best drafts. In hindsight, you got a franchise quarterback, you got Sean Ellis, you got a 10-year starter, and then you got a solid receiver in the third round. Like, that's not a bad class for them. Shane Leckler to the Raiders. And you could argue that Shane Leckler has a case to go to the Hall of Fame. Because if you look at his like resume, if you care about like all pro awards, so Leckler is a six-time first team all pro, third time second team all pro. He made 7 Pro Bowlers, or 7 Pro Bowls, and he was on the all decades team for 2000s and the 2010s. So for a fifth rounder, Shane Leckler was a really great pick. The Packers got Kabir Baja-Biamila, who was an edge rusher in the fifth
He
round.
went crazy too.
Yeah, he did. I didn't put that in the notes, but he had some interesting. I can't remember if it was tweets. Like I have to go look, but
He joined like
like
a cult, basically, like a religious cult.
Yeah, I remember reading something about it. I don't know the details on it, but listeners can go find out for themselves. Dante Hall to the Chiefs, and he was like the Devin Hester.
Yeah, the original, OG Devin Hester.
Yeah, he was electric. Man. He won them games in the 03 season when they went 13-3. Like he was their best player outside of Priest Holmes. He was just electrifying. So Dante Hall to the Chiefs in the 5th round, Mark Bulger to the Saints what a steal. Like you had Mark Bulger, who was a really good quarterback. The Saints, of course, didn't take any advantage of that, but like they got him in the 6th round.
Yeah.
And then Neil Rackers to the Bengals, so pretty solid kicker.
He didn't
Uh,
miss a kick in all of 2005.
yep. Dhani Jones, who
Yeah, the only reason why, well, Dhani Jones had like a long career. He played with the Eagles. He was
I
drafted
remember
by the
on the
Giants,
Eagles.
which I don't remember him on the Giants, but he's memorable to me because he did a show on the Discovery Channel in like 2009 where he went to different countries and tried different sports. And I remember he went to Ireland and tried hurling.
There you go.
Yeah, so
Uh,
that's why
I,
I remember Dhani Jones. And he went to Michigan.
I also think he did like a commercial, like a Head and Shoulders commercial. Like I
Yeah.
randomly
That seems
remember
kind
that.
of, yeah.
I remember like seeing it. I'm like, it's just Johnny Jones. It's not like
Yeah.
okay. But then I was like, well, you can't have Brian Urlacher do a hair commercial. And then and if people
Now
that
he
live in
can.
Chicago, yeah, people that like seeing Brian Urlacher with hair is like one of the freakiest. It still bothers me. I love how you put Matt Bowen here. That's just
Casey's listening.
Adalius Thomas to the Ravens. That was a solid pick. And then we'll mention Matt Bowen in case he's listening, because I know Neil's talked a little bit with him before.
I still have his phone number.
Yeah.
But he never called me back.
Yeah. But he was drafted pick 200. And the reason why that's so interesting is the guy that was picked 199, one pick ahead of Matt Bowen, was Tom Brady.
Tom Brady.
Yeah. So I think you might have heard of him. Arguably the greatest player in NFL history.
Yeah.
Won 6 Super Bowls, I think 3 MVP or 7 Super Bowls, three NFL MVP awards, a really, really cringeworthy roast where he didn't like a lot of the jokes. I think a lot of them were funny, but to me, roasts have always been really uncomfortable. So that's why I say cringeworthy. What else? We have, I mean, he's won the NFC, he's won the AFC. Basically, if you think of a guy that's won something, Tom Brady's probably won an
He's
award
done
in
it
the
more.
NFL. He's done it more than you. He's in the Patriots got him in the 6th round, and that's just freaking incredible. And we will probably never, with the draft getting better and better every single year, you will probably never see that good of a pick.
That
Well,
late.
number one, you'll probably never see a player like Brady
Yeah.
again. And then number 2 is like you'll never see a player that good that late, especially. So the
Tom
2000
Brady has the same amount of rushing touchdowns as Ron Dane had in his career.
That's sad. That's sad to think about. But who had more Heisman trophies?
I guess Ron Dane.
Yes. And Ron, don't disrespect Ron Dane. He was awesome. I think Wisconsin just ran him into the ground. Like
They killed him.
if you look at him, he's got like
They
1,000.
They gave him the Jeff Fisher treatment.
He literally, I think he had 1,000 carries in college.
Oh, Jesus.
Like, I
In
mean,
the Big Ten.
no, dude, he had 2,000 rushing yards as a freshman. Like Ron Dane. No, like go look at. I'm gonna pull up his stats here. This is really bad radio, so I apologize. But like, Ron Dane college stats. Where are you? There you go. So I'm on sportreference.com. So he had 1,100 career attempts.
Oh, the poor guy.
He had
It's 275 a year.
he never hit 2,000 rushing yards in a season, but as a freshman, so think of like a 18, 19-year-old. Everybody redshirted back then, so I'm assuming 19. He had 1,800 yards as a true as a redshirt freshman, 1,400 yards his sophomore season, 1,200 yards his junior season, and then 1,834 yards his senior season. 83 career touchdowns.
Wow.
And you can tell this is the late 90s because he had all like basically 1,100 touches and 31 career receptions. Like they did not throw him the ball. Like Wisconsin probably as a team under Barry Alvarez probably threw the ball on average like 13 times a game. So we should have saved this talking point and asked Aaron what he thought of that. Like
Yeah.
what he thinks. Like, hey, those Wisconsin teams were pretty good.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
about those what about the year Eddie George had 300 carries and averaged 3 yards per carry? He was so dead.
Oh my gosh. But anyway, we're done. That was the 2000 draft, and I'd say it's one of the most interesting drafts.
Yeah, just even going through there was like a few names like, obviously besides Brady and Urlacher's the only other, and Leckler are the only other notable Hall of Fame type players, but a lot of guys that, it sounds silly, but I remember playing, and you probably the same way. You remember playing in Madden when you were little. You remember watching on NFL Primetime. So a few names that certainly that I was like, oh, I didn't realize that guy was from the 2000 draft. So no, that was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I look back at some of these, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize he was even in that class. That's crazy to think about. But well, with that, we're gonna sign off. We will see y'all next week with, I guess, what will the next topic be?
Let me think here.
Well, we'll just tune in for a surprise.
Yeah, you figure it out. I'll figure it out.
Thank you again for listening to the Old Souls Football Podcast. Don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe on all your favorite podcast platforms.